Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Access to Democracy. I'm your host today, Steve Francisco, and it's a real pleasure for me to welcome our guest today, State Representative Laurie Halverson of Eagan. Welcome, Laurie.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
And as one of our crew just mentioned, we should extend a special thank you because you've dealt with our technical glitches this afternoon very patiently and have accommodated us. We appreciate it.
No problem.
This is your first appearance on Access to Democracy since you took office in January. A little bit of background, you've served your community for quite some time. You were chair, I believe, of the Eagan Parks and Recreation Commission. You served on the Eagan Foundation. And in 2012, you sought and won the DFL endorsement to run for the State House of Representatives, were subsequently elected in November. And one of the biggest issues that the legislature has taken up so far this year is the issue of the health insurance exchanges. In fact, you were a sponsor of House File number 5 to create a health insurance exchange in Minnesota. But a number of people, myself included, I guess, were more than a little bit perplexed about the fact that you were a co-sponsor of this bill. But in the past 10 days, you've actually voted against creation of a Minnesota health insurance exchange twice. You voted against the bill when it came to the floor in the House, and then most recently you just voted against the conference report. Can you explain to our viewers why it appears that you've switched positions on the health insurance exchange?
Well, I haven't switched positions on the exchange. I'm a firm believer in a Minnesota-based exchange because in Minnesota we have taken on healthcare reform. We took on healthcare reform before healthcare reform was cool. We instituted
with Minnesota Care,
with Minnesota Care, with MSHA, and with reforms that took place in 2008, promoting healthy communities with the what's called the SHIP, State Health Improvement Programs. Minnesota's been ahead of the curve on every single aspect of healthcare reform, and so I'm a firm believer in a Minnesota-based exchange. The difference between this Minnesota-based exchange and previous Minnesota successes with healthcare reform is that we have always brought a broad coalition together, a broad bipartisan coalition together to build healthcare reform. It never came together around this exchange. There was a lot, and I was a sponsor of the bill because I wanted to work hard on it, and I did, and I worked hard with the author, Representative Joe Atkins, who did great work. But when it came to the final conference committee report, a lot of the recommendations from the House really just weren't ultimately accepted, and we couldn't get that broad coalition to come together and push us over the edge.
So are you saying that you ended up voting no on the bill in the conference report because Republicans wouldn't go along with the bill?
No, because it was a bill that didn't have a broad coalition coming together to build it. Everybody's voices weren't reflected in what that final report was. And we came close. We actually came really close to having an exchange that was really going to reflect the values of Minnesota's healthcare system across the board, and we didn't quite get there.
Well, when we talk about the insurance exchange, and just so we explain to people, because some people, they hear this term health insurance exchange, and it may not be exactly clear what we're talking about. Actually, you described it very well in the Eagan Patch on February 14th. you said, your words, a health insurance exchange is an online marketplace where individuals, families, and small businesses can purchase insurance. But you also warned that if we didn't get this done by the end of March, you said the federal government will step in and do it for us. I think most of us would agree that a Minnesota-made solution is preferable, but now you voted twice against a Minnesota-made solution. Doesn't that mean if other members of the legislature had voted the way you did, Laurie, with all due respect, the health insurance exchange would be dead? There would not have been a conference report because the bill wouldn't have passed the House.
That's very true, and the bill did pass the House, and the bill, the conference committee report was accepted last night. So
right.
this, the exchange is moving forward as it was written. However, there are many stakeholders in the healthcare system that were not heard on the bill, and
who are some of those stakeholders that you're referring to?
Small businesses. I heard a lot from our community about this bill. People had a lot of concerns about the fact that about the costs that were going to be incurred, and there's a lot of complexity that goes into explaining this, but the way that Minnesota is able to regulate healthcare is very limited because of federal oversight and federal regulations. A law called ERISA really ties the hands of Minnesota in terms of regulating healthcare in the state for any plans that are what we call self-insured, where they bear all the risk and they hire a health plan to essentially administer their plan, as opposed to the fully insureds, which typically are very small businesses where they purchase an insurance plan. The insurer essentially bears the risk, and those are the plans that can be regulated by Minnesota. They're not covered under ERISA. Because of that, small employers tend to be the ones, and I shouldn't say tend to be the ones, they are the ones who, when healthcare taxes get raised in Minnesota, they're the ones that pay it because we can't levy those taxes against the large federal plans.
So the concerns that you have, though, about the deficiencies in the health insurance exchange, you were a co-sponsor of this bill, as we've said. Did you offer amendments in committee or on the floor to try to correct what you thought were the deficiencies in this bill? And how are small businesses better off? How are individuals better off without a Minnesota-made exchange?
I worked really hard behind the scenes with the author, talking and trying to bring people together.
Was Joe Atkins in the House?
In the House, yep. And along with other authors and other stakeholder groups to try to talk about this. I mean, one of my chief concerns about the way that our exchange has been set up is that it is supposed to be a very consumer-friendly board, but it's a board that is going to have a lot of power. They're going to make a lot of decisions about what kind of healthcare plans can be bought and sold in Minnesota, in the exchange, and outside of the exchange. Because of that, it seems to me to make sense to make sure that we have a broad group of stakeholders at the table to make those decisions. Instead, we've got 7 political appointees.
Well, you're referring to the fact that under the House bill that the governor would appoint the 7, essentially the Commissioner of Health and Human Services, and then 6 gubernatorial appointees.
Correct.
But what's wrong with that in the sense that the governor is elected by the people? What would your alternative be then for how the board would be appointed or composed?
Well, I look to the history of other such boards that our state has. We passed the Minnesota's high-risk pool back in the 70s and have had what's called the MSHA board, which has been a board of consumers and health plans and providers that have made decisions about how to run this high-risk pool to ensure that those individuals who couldn't get insurance through the individual marketplace because of pre-existing conditions would be able to, are guaranteed a place where they can get insurance. And MSHA is that place right now in Minnesota. It will be phased out because of this. But that board has operated for decades with...
So was the proposal, this
and
modification
I'd like to say
of
why they were successful, and MSHA has looked to, in fact, part of the linchpin of Obamacare was to start with, and Obamacare gets used a lot, but it's a great program. And I have been highly supportive of the Affordable Health Care Act, ACA, Obamacare, because we need to make sure that we're closing the gap on the uninsured in Minnesota. And they created a high-risk pool. in the Affordable Health Care Act, and it was essential to and they modeled that after Minnesota.
You've expressed some concern that the composition of this board that would govern the exchange needs to be broader. Should insurance companies have a seat on this board?
Minnesota insurance companies, because we want a Minnesota-based health exchange. Currently, if you are a provider of health care, if you are a hospital, if you are a health plan, you can't serve on this board. That's not true for other boards in the state, and I'd love to be able to explain why this is a concern for me. And it's because when you have a board of strictly political appointees, that board is going to shift with the wind, with the political winds. And this board might, for a Democrat like me, this board might look great when the Governor Dayton is appointing this board. If at some point we don't have a Democratic governor, at some point Governor Dayton is no longer the governor of Minnesota.
Which he won't be someday.
Exactly.
Right.
What is that board composition going to look like?
But the governor is elected by the people of Minnesota, and so whoever the governor is, whether it's Governor Dayton or a future governor, they are going to be held politically accountable for the people they appoint to the board.
But our healthcare system...
Well, let me ask this, though. Do you assume that anybody that the governor appoints would not be qualified, would not have the sophistication to understand issues involved with insurance?
Of course not. However, because we want to make sure that our healthcare system, this healthcare system that we build, has consistency and is able to move from administration to administration and political leadership to political leadership smoothly. If we put Minnesotans on a yo-yo, and we've seen this with policies at the state and the federal level, where we create great programs like Social Security Disability Insurance. That was a great, important program. But political winds saw to it that we decided who we valued in society and who didn't, and it was the most vulnerable that lost their Social Security Disability Insurance.
Laurie, your previous occupation, you had worked at Blue Cross Blue Shield, well known. It's also well known that Blue Cross Blue Shield was very much opposed to the health insurance exchange bill in the House. And they had some particular concerns regarding a conflict of interest provision, making sure that the people would be on the governing board didn't have conflicts of interest, like insurers perhaps. They also were concerned about an active purchaser model being in the legislation. This was in the bill that you co-sponsored. Right. And frankly, it looks like now that you've renounced that position, and a lot of people are perplexed about it, and you're mentioning that there may be other models that may be better, but I'm not hearing that you offered those as amendments to the bill, either in the Health Finance Committee or on the floor.
Well, there's many ways to influence legislation, and
did somebody else offer these ideas? Because I looked and I don't recall seeing that,
right.
But I know that Blue Cross Blue Shield was very upset about this bill. Did you promise Blue Cross Blue Shield that you would oppose this bill?
No, no. And I signed on as an author for the very reason that I wanted to be in a position to influence it, because I do have an understanding not just of Minnesota's current healthcare system, but how we built what we've built. We built a system in Minnesota where we've had the lowest uninsured rate in the country, and we have built that by bringing stakeholders to the table. We have built the only system in the country where our HMOs are required to be not-for-profit. In Minnesota, if you are covered by a Minnesota HMO, your healthcare dollars are going to your healthcare.
Right.
It's not going to stockholders.
But as I understand, this exchange that was going to be created, the estimate is that it would be available, that they're expecting that about 1.3 million Minnesotans, 1 out of every 5 Minnesotans, would purchase insurance through this by 2016, including about 300,000 Minnesotans who don't have insurance right now. So wouldn't it have been the better thing to have voted for this and then to have said, you know, maybe this isn't the perfect, but let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, that this gets us along the way and you can make improvements? I mean, we've both been involved. You've been involved, obviously, as a legislator, myself as a staff person in Congress. And we all know that when legislation comes up, a lot of times it doesn't function the way that you hope it will. But you get something to start with, and then you build upon it and improve it. What was so terrible about this exchange that you've now voted against it twice?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to note that the bill passed, and I was on the phone already today talking to folks about, okay, this is what we have. How do we make sure that we you know, that the things that I'm concerned about don't come true, because I would love nothing more for this to be than for this to be a fantastic success. And there were some really important there are some important things that are going to be happening in 2014. You mentioned the active selector provision. That's not going to exist as this exchange opens up. And what the active selector provision is essentially, it says that in Minnesota with federal and state standards will be set for all health plans operating within the exchange. The active selector allows the Board of Seven, the politically appointed Board of Seven, to decide after those criteria are set whether or not they can be accepted into the exchange. And that was a real concern for Minnesota plans, because the fact is 2 federal national plans are automatically allowed into our state exchange. And those are going to be plans that are probably going to be for profit, that are probably going to have a lot of capital to do a lot of marketing in Minnesota. And we still are going to be working with private health insurers. This is not a government takeover of healthcare like people like to talk about. And so it is my priority to make sure that what we've built in Minnesota, the values that we've put into our healthcare system, are maintained. And so that's what I'm working for. And
I think some of your constituents, in fact, I know this because I've been talking to a lot of people who were they were quite surprised by your vote, frankly, because you campaigned on access to affordable health care. And this is a key stepping stone toward achieving that. I think we all, and I accept that you too, we want to try to get this right. Because it's very important for a lot of people in our state who don't have insurance. But I have to tell you, Laurie, I think a lot of our viewers may be concerned about insurance companies stacking a board, having too much say. These are some of the same people, frankly, who come from companies that before Obamacare denied coverage for pre-existing medical conditions, set different premium rates based on gender and based on medical history, set lifetime limits on coverage, and those are things that we want to make sure that we don't have. And with Obamacare, we're not going to have it. But with the exchanges, we have a chance to get it right. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens in further discussions. And I'm sure the fact that the conference report passed too, and I understand the governor's going to sign it, we're still going to be hearing about this issue as members of the board get appointed. So let's turn to some other issues, because there are a lot of other issues, and I do want to touch on these. Governor Dayton has now submitted a revised budget proposal to the legislature in which he backed away from several provisions that drew a lot of controversy, particularly his proposal for levying the sales tax for the first time on business-to-business services, and also taxing clothing over $100. Do you think the governor was right to back away from those controversial provisions?
I think that the governor was right to listen to Minnesotans. One of the most impressive things that I've seen at the legislature is the call for us from both our leadership in the House and from the governor to go back and represent our districts, and the amount of support that we have to do that. And so when the governor came to us as a caucus and presented his budget, he said, now I want to know what your communities think about this. Go represent your districts. And I think a lot of people would be surprised at that, because I think that they think there's a lot of backroom pressure going on. We have a governor, and we have leadership, and we have a legislature now that wants to represent their districts. And we understand how diverse Minnesota is. We've got, and as a DFL, we're representing urban Minnesota, rural Minnesota, and now significantly suburban Minnesota. And there's a lot of different values and ideas that are coming from those parts of the state. And all of those ideas need to be reflected in the policies that we're making at the state. And so the governor heard loud and clear, and I had the chance to talk to him personally on more than one occasion, that folks were really concerned across the board about the business-to-business sales tax, about expanding the sales tax base. And so taking that step at that point, he made the decision not to do that, and he made it based on what he heard from Minnesotans.
So the governor listened to Minnesotans, and he's revised his proposal, and I take it you agree with much of what he said about those modifications. But the business community now, you know, the governor backed off on his sales tax proposals, but the Republicans in the legislature are holding the governor's feet to the fire and DFLers and saying absolutely no increases whatsoever in income taxes. The governor still is pursuing his proposal to tax the very highest incomes in Minnesota, $150,000 or more for individuals, $250,000 or more for married couples filing jointly. And it seems, wouldn't this be the right time for the Republicans to say, well, you know, the governor backed off a little bit on the sales tax proposals that he had for expanding the sales tax. Maybe we need to recognize we need a balanced approach to solving Minnesota's budget issues, and that approach includes not just spending cuts, but has to include new revenue too. Wouldn't you agree?
I like your view of the way government should run, and that we all need to be out there representing our districts no matter what party we're from. I think that we've lived too long with leaders who wanted to represent a party and not represent the people. And it's messier to represent the people because you get a few more competing ideas going on. But at the end of the day, we're going to end up with better public policy, and we're going to end up with a government that is actually built and run by the people. That's how it was designed, and we're all really committed to making sure that that happens again.
Let me ask you real quickly, because you know, I think I was joking with you before the show began, Laurie. I said I've got enough questions we could easily do a 1-hour show, so we'll have to have you back sometime in the future. I want to ask you real quickly about a bonding bill. Governor Dayton is proposing a $750 million bonding bill to do public works construction projects, some of which are very badly needed, one of which is right in the very building that you work in. Our state capitol is falling apart. And so the governor has money in a bonding bill proposal to fix that, also for money for the Minneapolis Veterans Home that needs restoration. Will you support a bonding bill this year? I'm
looking forward to getting to vote on a bonding bill. There's a few bonding projects that are rising to the top. You mentioned the state capitol. Minnesota Zoo also has some bonding needs that they've identified right here in our backyard, and those bonding projects are jobs. Not only are we looking at building up the infrastructure of our state, in some cases repairing it, in some cases, you know, creating state-of-the-art facilities that we need to compete, but we're putting people to work.
Right.
And those folks are going to be spending money in our community. They're going to be building homes. They're going to be settling here, and they're going to be raising their kids here and investing in our community.
You know, another good reason, Laurie, the last time I looked, interest rates are still relatively low. And so for the capital improvement projects that Minnesota needs to make in our infrastructure right now, we're probably not going to be able to borrow the money as inexpensively as far as the interest rates go than right now. So that's another plus, puts people to work, and you can borrow the money at a better price. Guns. The tragedy that occurred in Newtown, Connecticut last December broke this nation's heart, and the echoes of that tragedy have reached right here to Minnesota. Your colleague, Representative Tony Cornish, has called for allowing teachers to carry concealed weapons in the classroom and for posting armed police officers in every school in Minnesota. Do you agree or disagree with Representative Cornish?
Well, I disagree. Teachers don't become teachers because they want to become police officers. They become teachers because they want to nurture the minds of our future and build our future. It's not practical to me that we post armed guards in all of our schools and that we create a military style lockdown situation in our schools. Those are the centers of our community, and we need to find ways to make people safe, and we can do that a number of different ways, and some of those might be legislative actions, and a lot of them, I believe, are creating a society that is where we value kindness and understanding and community, and that we know our neighbors.
On guns again, there's a lot of talk about closing backgrounds or closing loopholes in so-called background checks for gun purchasers, and of course this issue is being debated in Washington at the federal level too. Would you favor tougher background checks for potential gun buyers to look at issues of perhaps mental illness, criminal record? Would you favor taking a closer look at those types of issues and doing something about it?
Well, the legislature is taking a closer look. There's 2 bills currently in the Minnesota House of Representatives, and there were extensive hearings held early in the legislative session, so that the chair of the committee, the Public Safety Committee, could really get a feel for where Minnesotans are in terms of their concerns about gun violence and their ideas for how we make our communities safer. And from that came the Public Safety Omnibus Bill, and there are in that proposal, essentially that proposal mirrors what our police officers in Minnesota are asking for. The ability to have greater understanding of backgrounds of folks who are buying the guns, and making sure that folks that are purchasing guns at gun shows are required to go through the background checks. And there's kind of a disparity at gun shows. I found out that those federally licensed dealers are doing their due diligence and doing background checks, but there's sort of a basement world at those gun shows where folks can do private sales at gun shows and not have to require
very important issue, and I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about it, both at the federal level and state level. Let me pivot real quickly to another issue. Very controversial issue. Minnesotans last November rejected a state constitutional marriage, prohibiting marriage between people of the same sex and enshrining that in the state constitution. There is now legislation, both the House and Senate, moving through committees, which would actually legalize same-sex marriage in the state of Minnesota. If the leadership brings this bill to a vote this session, will you vote for it or against it?
I have always been a supporter of marriage equality, and I said that on the campaign trail, and I got asked it a lot. It was actually good that we had that conversation during the campaign, but that's a basic civil rights issue, and so I'm a supporter of marriage equality.
Another quick issue while we're down to our 2-minute warning. Minimum wage. Minnesota has one of the lowest minimum wages of any state in the country, currently $6.15 an hour, well below the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. There is a House bill, as you know, calling for an increase to $10.55 an hour by 2015 for large employers, but a Senate bill calls for an increase to only $7.50 an hour. Governor Dayton recently said he would be comfortable with an increase in the range to $9 to $9.50. Do you support an increase in the minimum wage?
Yeah, in fact, we just voted on that in the Commerce Committee. The bill has been amended now to have the top rate be $9.95, so just under $10. So, and I think that's part of the compromise of finding a place in the middle with the Senate and with the governor. But that top $9.95 rate actually reflects the rate of inflation that we've been seeing since Minnesota passed its first minimum wage law back in 1973. And so, to me, that feels like a logical step that we would start indexing at 2%, the growth we've seen since '73.
And as long as we're talking about wages real quickly, talking about legislators' salaries, an issue which is always difficult for legislators to talk about, but it turns out our state legislators have not seen a raise since 1999. Today, you and your colleagues earn $31,140 a year, but there's a proposal from a commission that suggests raising legislator salaries to $40,800, not right away, but in 2015. Would you support raising legislators' pay to some new level in the future? And of course, it would apply after the next election.
Yeah, I don't know that there's any action that's going to be taken or seen in the legislature. I don't see any momentum for a bill getting introduced. Personally, I would probably not vote for it. The folks haven't been getting what they wanted to from the legislature for several years.
Laurie Halverson, thank you so much for being our guest today on Access to Democracy. Thank you for your service for the people of Eagan and the state of Minnesota, and we'll have you on again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.